So back in May, I talked about my life after depression. I talked about both the post-depression periods and talked about how what all went down during those two time periods. Part 1 was Storytime 20 and Part 2 was Storytime 21 in case you are wondering. These were really fun story times to write. However, while writing about Part 1, a thought came into mind. I've never really talked much about my life before depression. Maybe I should talk about it in its own story time, which it's true. Although I have written quite a few story times that take place during this time period, I've never examined this time period in detail. So today, I'm going to talk about my life before the depression. I'm Zach, and this is Storytime 42, on November 19th, 2021. So to start, let's talk about some backstory. So I had depression from September 2017 to March 2018. The three main reasons I was depressed were from being bullied at school, stress from schoolwork, and online influences. At first, depression didn't really interfere with my life. It was just there to be there. It still influenced me pretty heavily as a person, but it didn't actually prevent me from getting things done. January 2018 would be when depression started to get really serious. It was now affecting me so negatively that it was hard for me to really get anything done. February would be when I became suicidal, where I not only thought about killing myself, but I also began hurting myself. March would be when I came up with the plan to commit suicide. Luckily, I never committed suicide, as I received the help I needed. I explained the situation more in depth in Storytime 28, although I also did a really good job in Storytime 40 if you're interested. Now, if you've seen those story times, you probably know about the situation had a major impact on me. In Storytime 40, I refer to it as the situation that turned me into an adult. I have also written about it more than any other topic I've written about, both in Storytime and my private writings, so this is a pretty big deal. This Storytime will be about my life before I became depressed. Now, technically, I could consider this time period as being from June 21st, 2004 to September 2017, but instead, I have a specific time frame for this time period. I call it the pre-depression period. The pre-depression period was a time period from January 1st, 2017 to September 2017, or in easier terms, pretty much the entire year of 2017 minus the months I was depressed. This is what I would call the good part of 2017. It was a time period of growth and maturity. I would also begin doing creative activities and have continued to influence me even today, as we'll see in February, with a hobby that actually influenced the conception of Storytime. So this is a really good time period to live in. I also want to mention how old I was, as well as what happened a few months prior. So, I was 12 years old when this time period began. I would have my 13th birthday during this time, but we'll get to that later. Anyways, I was in the 7th grade when this time period began. 7th grade was one of the best school years of my life. Even though the first bit of the school year was stressful since it was my first year in middle school, I adapted to this new environment pretty quickly. I also made multiple friends that were very loyal. I did get bullied a little bit in 7th grade, but it's really hard to call them bullies, as they were more like frenemies. Whenever they made fun of me, they didn't mean it in a serious way, and I knew that, so I laughed with them. There was also a ton of drama throughout the school year that I wasn't involved in, which is always fun to talk about. So 7th grade was a good school year. In addition, I also made all A's this school year, so 7th grade was really a stress-free school year. Another big influence of the pre-depression period was my YouTube channel. So I began my YouTube channel the day before my 12th birthday on June 20th, 2016. The first video would not be uploaded until June 22nd, 2016. Now, for you legends who have been subscribed to my channel for a long time, y'all probably know that I used to upload multiple videos a day. Although y'all are probably more familiar with the content that I uploaded. So my channel used to be completely focused on a game called the Dimperman. In this 3-game series, you pretty much help a creature known as the Dimperman travel across the world to save his girlfriend Crystal, a Dimper girl. It's a really weird game, but each of the 3 games are surprisingly very enjoyable. It was also a really easy game to record, since all I had back then was an iPod Touch and some blocks. It's for 3DS, by the way, which is why I made it easy to record, since recording 3DS gameplay with blocks is surprisingly really easy to do. If you're confused, then I highly recommend watching Storytime 25 to get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But anyways, this game especially will be important when I get to May, so be prepared for that. Now, also just about 2.5 weeks prior to starting my YouTube channel, I started swimming competitively. So my sister wanted to swim as a sport. I was kind of reluctant about it, but mom and dad forced both me and her to start swimming anyway. And surprisingly, I actually enjoyed it. We began swimming on June 4th. The coach at the time was really good. He pretty much understood that I didn't want to do it, so he made it his mission to get me interested in it, and it worked. I started to enjoy it thanks to him. One way he got me interested was introducing me to a boy who is now one of my closest friends. He doesn't like going by his real name on the internet, so that's why in any story time I've done, I've always called him Aki, and I'll keep doing that in this story time. Anyways, Aki is a little younger than I am. He was 11 and a half when I swam, which I, of course, was just 2 weeks from turning 12. He had been swimming for a year at this point, although I quickly became better than him somehow. He was a rising 6th grader, so he was a grade younger than I was. He's also a massive weeb, as he loves anime, but he's still really nice and a really cool dude. Now about the coach, he left the team in late June. He moved to Texas for some reason, so we got a new coach. This new coach was also cool. So let's begin talking about the pre-depression period. So on December 31st, 2016, me and my family stayed up 12 in the morning to watch the ball drop. We of course celebrated the new year like everyone else did after the ball drop. It was a nice way of wrapping up 2016. 2016 was an amazing year, and it set the precedent for many things that affected me from 2017 onwards. So New Year's Day was pretty uneventful. It was a Sunday, so yes, we had to go back to school on January 2nd. This was our first full week of school. So I think a good place to begin is to talk about my schedule at school. So my first block was English. Normally, English classes are pretty memorable, especially freshman English. However, 7th grade English was by far the most forgettable English. I don't know why, but it just was. I guess it's just because of the drama that happened throughout the school year that greatly overshadowed academics, which makes sense. If you've seen Storytime 15, you probably understand. My next class was When, or What I Need. They pretty much just looked over our 6th grade school year and determined what we needed help with. In 6th grade, I made the highest grades I ever made, so I was placed in an enrichment win. My enrichment win was Science Olympiad. This is where you choose a competition to compete in and compete against other schools in the state. It sounds complicated, but it's extremely basic. The competition I was going to participate in was hovercraft. This is a competition where you have to create a mini hovercraft and race other mini hovercrafts. Since the beginning of the school year, I had been working on it with a fellow 7th grader and 2 8th graders. We all had a lot of fun working on it. The competition took place on March 4th. I did not participate in it, which I'll get to why in a little bit. After When came second block, or in my case, Social Studies. Social Studies was a pretty fun class, but like English, I didn't exactly remember the class all too well. I do remember our teacher being really short though, like every single student in the class was taller than her, so if a fight broke out in her class, then she's kinda screwed. After Social Studies came Science. Science was probably my favorite class just because of the teacher. He was really cool. Unfortunately though, he would only last for another month, which I'll get to why later on. Now, his class was really weirdly structured. It was weirdly structured because about 45 minutes into it, we had lunch. Why did they do this? I don't know, but lunch in 7th grade was always fun. Then we had 15 more minutes of science. Afterwards came my lab. My lab was computer skills and application. Pretty much all the typing ability and knowledge of word processing software. Most of my knowledge from this stuff comes directly from this class. Our teacher had taught us really well. So while I apply everything she taught me to pretty much everything I do today in regards to computers and typing, especially in regards to Storytime. This paragraph was awfully written. Just that I use Times New Roman 14 font and not 12 font when writing story times. I did that to help me see better since my eyesight is so bad, by the way. Just completely ignore just what I said for like the past few seconds. That is by far the worst paragraph I think I've ever written in my entire life. Like, my kindergarten self could probably write a better paragraph than that. Anyways, this class had a final exam that we interestingly took in December. That's strange because the class didn't end until February. Once again, I'll get to that later. So pretty much we just went over the rest of the course. We talked about writing memos during this time. It was pretty easy to learn and apply. After computers came PE. So if you saw Storytime 40, you already know how I felt about PE in middle school. PE was awful. The PE teachers were assholes. But for some reason, they seem to have been better in 7th grade than they were in 8th grade. No idea why, but they were. Even though they did the same stuff as they did in 8th grade, I guess it just had to do with the fact that I wasn't being depressed and all. But they were still assholes in 7th grade, just not as big as assholes as they were in 8th grade. After PE came 4th block, being math. So math was really interesting. I never really paid much attention, mostly because I didn't have to, as 7th grade math was pretty much a review of 6th grade math, as well as because of course math being my best subject. However, I do remember the teacher being really funny, but after math, it was time to go home. So that's how my schedule worked. So now let's move on a little bit to Friday, January 6th. So a pretty funny thing happened in PE that day. So me and this girl were talking back in December. She had a big crush on me, which kinda reflected on me, as she always kinda made me feel special about myself. Pretty much any girl that comes up to me and talks to me does that since I'm a lonely piece of shit. Anyways, this is the day that she asked me out, and I said yes and we started dating. This was the first girlfriend I ever had, as well as the only girlfriend I've ever had. I won't mention her name as we broke up, which I'll get to later, but for the time being, yeah, I had a girlfriend. Now, the next day was also supposed to be a big day. Saturday, January 7th, was supposed to be my first ever swim meet. We had a new coach since September, actually, and both me and the coach agreed that it was time for me to participate in a swim meet. However, this meet ended up getting cancelled, so the night of January 6th, it began snowing, and it stuck. Here in the South, anytime it snows, everything is immediately called off since our cars aren't built to drive through snow. That's what happened with this meet. It got cancelled. Therefore, my first meet would actually be in March. I also want to go ahead and mention that there are 5 total meets I'm going to talk about throughout the story time, as my first 5 meets took place during this time period, so be on the lookout for those. So then let's jump a little bit to Friday, January 27th, and Saturday, January 28th. So January 25th was Aki's 12th birthday, but since his birthday fell on a Wednesday, he decided to just celebrate it that weekend. He pretty much did a sleepover party. He invited me and 3 other friends over. I was the second oldest of the bunch, the oldest being about 8 months older than me. Aki was actually the youngest, so that night we just hung out, ate pizza, pulled pranks, and that stuff. All of us had a good time. But what really made the sleepover memorable was Saturday. So we all went to an anime convention since Aki is a massive weeb. Well, all 5 of us boys were, and still are, massive weebs, so I can't say shit. However, what's memorable about this convention was that Aki recorded a video of us at the convention. He had his own YouTube channel, by the way, where he talked about anime and other stuff. In the video, all of us could be seen. Everyone's face was shown except mine, as I requested to not have my face shown since I was kinda iffy about that back in the day. But this was still the first time I ever was featured in a YouTube video. It's no longer public anymore, as Aki deleted his YouTube channel about a year and a half ago, but it was still cool and we all had fun. We also all played a bunch of pranks on each other too, so that was fun as well. Speaking of YouTube, I want to talk about taking a break from YouTube. So on January 24th, I released my last Implement video for about 4 months. I came back in May, but I took a break mostly due to burnout, so taking a break was good for me. So for now, there won't be any mention of my YouTube channel until then. However, that's not to say that I wasn't productive in regards to my YouTube channel during this break. In February, I would start doing something that would ultimately influence my YouTube channel for the years to come. So let's move on to February, shall we? So to start, I want to talk about one specific day, February 17th. This was an extremely important day, not just for the pre-depression period, but really for my entire life. You'll see why that night. But to start, this was the last day of the first semester. The first semester of 7th grade ended this year because of snow days. Normally it ends via Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, but this year due to snow, it didn't. It also was extremely important because this was our science teacher's last day. Outside of being a science teacher, he was a fitness trainer, more specifically in running. He loved to run, like he once ran an over 100-mile race. So now he wanted to focus on it full time, which I understand. So on this day, the first part of science was just us watching the video. We were allowed to talk and do whatever we wanted to. I believe me and some friends tried to look up the word sex in the dictionary during this time. The second part of the class was a speech given by our science teacher. He talked about what he had learned throughout the school year of having us. He also wished us all good luck and said his last goodbye. This is the last I ever heard of him. This is also the last day of computers. For this day, we celebrated by just playing cool math games and stuff. And then comes that night, so this would be when I officially 100%ed Super Mario Galaxy for the first time. Even though I started playing this game when I got it for Christmas back in 2010, it wasn't until over 6 years later when I finally 100%ed the game. Super Mario Galaxy is to this day my favorite video game, so this was special. However, the biggest event that happened that day was that after completing the game, I challenged myself to try to write out a top 10 list on the hardest stars from the game. Super Mario Galaxy has 121 unique stars to collect. To 100% the game, you have to collect every star as both Mario and Luigi. So since I had collected every star twice, I had a pretty good understanding of what the difficult ones were. So I laid out my top 10 and began writing, and in case you're wondering, I placed Lava Spire Daredevil Run as the hardest star, which I still agree with today. I spent about 3 hours on this top 10. That's very little compared to how long it takes me to write Storytime. Storytime 40, the longest Storytime I've ever written, took me about 35 hours to write, including a 14-hour session and a 10-hour session of writing, so 3 hours is nothing nowadays, but back then, it felt like a huge accomplishment. I stayed up until 1 in the morning to finish this, and I was successful. Now, why was this simple act of me writing about the 10 hardest Super Mario Galaxy stars so important? Well, this is the first thing I ever wrote outside of school. I enjoyed every minute of writing this, so I continued to write more and more. Throughout March, April, and May, I would write more and more top 10 lists, mostly about Super Mario Galaxy too, although I would branch out to other games later on. Now, although it wouldn't be until much later, this event set the stage for me to begin writing as a hobby. I eventually started writing more personally about myself rather than video games when I began Storytime almost a year ago. Although I do have some evidence of me writing about myself as early as after being discharged from the hospital in March 2018. Just that it wasn't Storytime, and it really just wasn't long papers like I wrote today. They were more like journal articles, but yeah, this is the beginning of my writing career. Now, moving on from that, I want to take a step back and talk about something rather hilarious that someone said on the bus. So I forgot what day it was, but it was sometime in early February. It was really damp, but it was also really warm on the bus. Everyone was complaining about the temperature, but that's when a girl spoke up and shouted to the bus driver, "Can you turn down the heat? Feels like hot pussy in here." Everyone, including myself, just died laughing. The bus driver also died laughing, so much so that she pulled over the bus just because she was laughing so much. She did turn down the heat at least, but still, that was funny. Let's move on to Monday, February 20th. So this is a really weird day. To start, let's talk about science. So the school had not managed to find a new science teacher or a sub. Therefore, for this day and the next day, we have science in the library. The librarian gave us our assignment and told us to get to work. Needless to say, nobody did their work. We all pretty much just talked and messed around. After all, who's going to grade this assignment if there is no teacher? So nobody did it. Not even I did it, as we'll see in June why me not doing it is significant compared to anyone else in the class. This day was also pretty strange because we got a new lab. My lab was a class called Technology and Innovation. This class really sucked. Mostly because we did pretty much exactly the opposite of what I thought we would do. I thought we were going to learn how to build something. Turns out we pretty much just learned about technology and what it entailed, so that sucked. Most days we were required to write either a half-page or a full-page journal article about a specific thing relating to the course. Now, you might think that this wasn't bad, considering writing was now my hobby, but the bad part was that not only was it not about something about me or things that I like, we also had to handwrite these. I have the handwriting of a doctor. Not only that, but after writing maybe a quarter page, my hands got extremely sore, so this class sucked. Now, for that Friday, I participated in a church event called 180. Now, I've talked plenty about church events at my current church. However, I didn't grow up in this church that I currently go to. I've actually been a member at 3 different churches. This is the second church. This event was for middle school and high school. It pretty much worked almost the same as D-Now 2018 did. See Storytime 12 if you're interested in my experience at D-Now, by the way. It's a really old Storytime, but it's still a good one. Now, I've never mentioned 180 in any Storytime prior to this, simply because I have very little memory of it. Not only that, but it's extremely insignificant compared to other church events I've done. It was really just D-Now, but without big-ass sessions, and the house I stayed at was just me and 2 8th graders. Both of them were really nice at least, but that's really the extent of what I remember. So don't expect me to do a Storytime dedicated to 180, as nothing happened during it. But don't be too surprised if one day I do a Storytime on this event, as it could happen, but the odds are extremely low. So let's move on back to school. So Tuesday, February 28th, the last day of February, but not just the last day of the month, it was also the last day of me and my girlfriend's relationship. In PE, we were outside just walking around, but when I was looking like I wasn't looking, my girlfriend hugged another boy and kissed him. This boy just happened to be her ex as well. Right when she was kissing him is when I noticed her. I then approached her pretty angrily and broke up with her on the spot. So that's the end of that relationship. After breaking up with her, I haven't talked to her since. I also have not even had a girlfriend since. Before you ask, no, it's not because my ex from 5 years ago. It's because 1, I can't talk to girls, and 2, I look like Greg Heffley with glasses. So I guess I'm forever alone. Anyways, that got a little dark. Let's move on to March. I'll start off by talking about my first swim meet. So this meet took place on Saturday, March 4th. However, the Science Olympiad competition was that day as well, so I had to choose between the two. I ultimately went with the swim meet. I let my Science Olympiad instructor know what was happening beforehand so she could prepare. So Saturday, March 4th, my first swim meet. This is a rather small meet. Each event had only like 3 heats at max, so it went by very quickly. It took place in a little city called Rutherfordton, which is kind of like the halfway mark between me, which I live in Charlotte, and my grandmother, who lives in Asheville, so she too came over and saw it. So at this meet, I swam a 100 IM, a 100 freestyle, and a 100 backstroke. I don't remember any of my time since it's been so long, but I do remember that this meet went pretty smoothly. However, after I finished the backstroke, I was told that I was going to be participating in the boys 200 IM medley. This caught me off guard since I didn't know that I would be swimming this, but I still swam it anyway. I swam with 3 other boys, obviously. All three of them were much older and better than I was, so that was interesting. I swam freestyle. We did well. We only got 2nd place, but we still did well. So that meet was a success. The next one I mentioned took place 3 weeks after this one. I'll get there in a bit. Now, outside swimming, March was a really fun month at school. For one, we finally got a permanent teacher for science. She was a lot stricter than our old science teacher, but I followed the directions and wasn't too crazy, so I didn't mind. However, literally her 3rd day as our teacher, a fight almost broke out. So we were doing a web quest where we got to work in groups. I was in a group with 2 friends. Now, this did not involve my group. It involved another group. So there was a group of 2 just about 3 yards from us. This group consisted of this huge black dude and a really scrawny white dude. In Storytime 15, I referred to this black dude as Escalator Man because back in December, he broke an escalator in the mall. It's a really funny story. Go check out Storytime 15 if you're interested. Anyways, Escalator Man and the small kid got into some trouble, so that's when out of nowhere, Escalator Man towered over this kid and screamed, "I'm gonna F you up, bitch! Try me, you effing asshole!" Now, glaringly, he said this a lot scarier than I did, as well as a lot louder than I did as well. I can't really yell right now since it's currently 2:30 in the morning, but Escalator Man yelled this so loudly that the classroom beside us, being the math room, could hear us. We didn't hear them laugh. We weren't laughing though, as we were all terrified that Escalator Man was going to beat the shit out of this kid. Our teacher then came over and settled it. She did it pretty calmly as well, which is pretty impressive considering what was happening. Both of them were sent to the office. Once they left, all of us, including the teacher, started laughing. This is by far the second scariest moment from 7th grade. The scariest moment would happen in May, which I'll get to later. However, after returning from a day of in-school suspension, he was still pissed off at his friend. Therefore, he got into another argument 2 days later in the second portion of the class. However, rather than getting super aggressive like he did earlier, he decided to go off in a pretty hilarious manner. I can't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember that he combined his insult with 2 adjectives and with that end with the suffix "ly." This cracked everyone up, as he sounded like a 5-year-old when he said it. He didn't get in trouble for this since he didn't cuss, but it was still really funny. On the topic of funny moments in science, I also want to mention a rather funny situation that involves me being bullied by a frenemy, if that's what you call it. So we were on our way to lunch. Out of nowhere, when I was off guard, he pulled me to the wall and said, "I stared at your mom's pussy last night." This is exactly why I never took them seriously, since they said stuff like this. I replied by calling him a porn star, which made him and everyone else around us start laughing. I laughed too. By far one of the greatest replies I think I've ever responded with. Now, diving away from school, let's talk about my second swim meet, no pun intended. So, unlike the previous meet, this meet was huge. It took place at Mecklenburg Aquatics Club, which is a huge swimming center in uptown Charlotte. Some very prominent swimmers, including Michael Phelps himself, have swam at a meet here. This place trains Olympians, so makes sense. I swam this meet on Saturday, March 25th. Now, being a massive meet, there was also more people swimming, so much so that almost every event had around 11 heats. That's 22 heats total for just one stroke in distance, since one event is for boys and others is for girls. Now, unlike my first meet, I do not remember exactly what events I swam. I do know that I swam the 50 backstroke and the 100 IM. I might have swum the 100 freestyle, although I am not sure, but I do remember this being successful. But oddly enough, this meet isn't really why I remember it. The real reason I remember this meet is actually because of what happened afterwards. So for whatever reason, Mom and my sister were away somewhere. Therefore, the only people who saw this meet were Dad and my 2 grandmothers. After I finished my final event, we decided to stop at Buffalo Wild Wings to celebrate how well I did at the meet. I don't know why, but I just remember sitting there enjoying life while eating chicken wings and watching basketball while Dad and my grandmothers were talking. Good times. That would be my last meet until June, so it'll be a little bit before I talk about my next meet. Then that brings me to April. In every story time that I've done that involves this month, I've always stated that I don't remember much from this month. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that this month is sandwiched into March and May, both of which were extremely crazy and chaotic months. I also did not release any YouTube videos this month, although I did write some more stuff about Super Mario Galaxy. But it's not to say that not anything happened. For one, I did a project for Science Olympiad. We were asked to just make a presentation on anything we wanted to. I roomed with Anonymous on this. This is the same kid who I roomed with on the Blowing Rock trip, as well as the kid who moved to Durham. We originally were going to do a presentation on logarithms, but since I glaringly had no clue what these were, we instead decided to do a presentation on Google Easter eggs. So stuff like do a barrel roll, Google in 1998, Atari Breakout, and other stuff. It was successful and we both had a lot of fun creating the presentation. There's also a kind of embarrassing situation that happened to me this month, although it's really fun to talk about. So this happened on April 25th. So during PE, we were playing dodgeball, but that's when all of a sudden, my shorts ripped. Yeah, that's scary. Also note that we're in 7th grade, so people are going to laugh. A friend saw this and started laughing, but while laughing, he pretty much helped me out. He told me where to go and get a replacement pair and all. So I went and did that. After getting a replacement pair, I went into the bathroom to change clothes. But let's just say that my experience changing clothes was rather interesting. So while I was changing clothes, 2 boys were fighting, but they weren't playing around. It actually seemed like they were trying to kill each other. Like, I was walking into a stall, I saw both of them try to shove each other into the sink. They were also, of course, throwing punches and tackling each other. Then when I was in the stall, they were just going crazy. At one time, they hit my stall door and it almost broke off. I eventually got a new pair of shorts without any altercations with the 2 boys, but wow, they were crazy. I didn't tell anyone about it since I'm not a snitch, although I did tell some friends what happened and the story spread across the school. Just that I didn't know the names of the 2 boys, so they never got in trouble for it. So that was one of many fights that occurred throughout 7th grade. I'll actually be discussing 4 fights in the story time, 3 in May, 1 in June, and 1 in June, so be prepared for that. Finally, to wrap up April, let's talk about another funny incident that happened on the bus. So, I sat beside a kid named Kelvin. Me and Kelvin were good friends. So, on the bus, we were not allowed to have our phones out. However, Kelvin decided to whip out his phone for some reason. As a joke, I snatched his phone. He was holding it tight though, but then out of nowhere, he screamed "bullshit" at the top of his lungs. Everyone started laughing. Our bus driver seemed to never heard us, although she probably did, just that she didn't do anything about it. Nonetheless, it was funny. I also let go of his phone after that as well. So then, how about we move on to May? So firstly, I think a good place to begin would be me coming back to YouTube. So I came back to YouTube on May 7th by starting up a Dipman 2 playthrough. It was a really fun to record a series. However, this would be when my channel began to blow up amongst the Dipman community. It started getting around 100-200 views per video. Now, outside of YouTube, school was also extremely crazy this month. So on Monday, May 8th, I took my final exam for technology. It was an extremely easy exam too. We also received our grade right after we finished, which was very convenient. I ended up making a 94 on it, which was also the highest grade in the entire class. But another thing to mention about this test too was that there was a question where I was the only student in the entire class to get it correct. Our teacher noticed was going over the test afterwards and actually called me out for getting it right. Not only that, but he took the test himself and even he got it wrong. So he asked me how I got the answer. I knew this was the answer from my notes. I forgot what the question was, but I remember pulling out the one piece of notes and showing where I found it. I didn't explain why it was right alongside with the notes, which he didn't understood. So yeah, I knew more content than the teacher did. Pretty glaring that I made an A in this class. So let's move on to that Friday, May 12th. This day was probably the most chaotic day of the entire school year. So to start, we went on a field trip that day. We went to the skating rink. I don't remember much from it. Afterwards, we went to the park. The park had a playground that we all played on. Kinda weird that they do this for 7th graders, but I'm not complaining. We all had fun. I remember me and a couple friends were sitting on top of the slide while playing music. Pretty much everyone did something that you shouldn't do on a playground, like climbing on top of railings and stuff. One kid even jumped jumped really high off of a slide and got his picture taken while midair. That was cool. But the really memorable part about this day was actually when we arrived back at school. When we arrived back at school, there were some police cars and ambulances outside the school. Their lights were flashing as well, so something happened while we were gone. When we got off the bus, we were instructed to immediately go to our first spot. So in my case, English. Whenever everyone got into their room, our teacher closed and locked the door shut. That's when we learned that our school was in lockdown. Nobody knew why we were in lockdown, although I would learn that night. Then the clock hit 3. 3 o'clock is normally when we were dismissed. However, the rules regarding lockdown are that a lockdown can still be in place even after school is supposed to be over. As a result, we were not dismissed until 3:30. That night at swim practice, I was talking to a friend. This friend was an 8th grader at the time. He knew the whole story because he saw it firsthand. Here's what went on. So the school went into lockdown because of a fight. This fight was between 2 8th graders. One of those 8th graders was a black belt in karate. The other 8th grader insulted that black belt's girlfriend. The black belt didn't like that, so he told him to go to the bathroom to fight. To say that the black belt kicked this kid's ass is an understatement. This dude whipped the ever-living shit out of him. He broke this kid's arm, leg, and busted his head open. It got so severe that the blood covered his entire shirt. This kid from swim practice was in a stall and saw the fight. After running out, he immediately told the teacher what was happening and then got the situation dealt with. The black kid faced black belt faced 3 punishments, not the black kid. I'm pretty sure he was white. The first one is that he got expelled. The second is that he had to pay for his kid's stitches. And third, charges were pressed against him. He ended up serving a couple years behind bars, although he's currently on parole. All of this over a middle school girlfriend. The best part about this is that his girlfriend broke up with him the next week, so all this was just a waste of time. But the mayhem didn't stop there. Just 1 week later, on May 19th, there was another fight. This time though, a lot less crazy than the fight the week prior. Now, like the fight in the bathroom, I saw this fight with my own eyes. This is the same case for the next fight and the June fight. Anyways, instead of taking place in the bathroom, this fight took place on the balcony outside the cafeteria. We were allowed to hang out over here for the duration of our lunch period if we maintained good grades and didn't get into any trouble. I made all A's in 7th grade and I didn't get into trouble, so I was of course eligible to do this as well as most others. However, 2 boys came in out here not necessarily to talk, but to fight. Normally, our principal watched over everyone during lunch, but for whatever reason, she wasn't there that day, so this is the perfect time for the boys to start fighting, so that's what they did. They didn't really do a whole lot, they just tackled and ran into each other, but that's really it. It also didn't last long, as another friend came over and pulled my friend off of that kid. Some teachers also saw from that window, so they went over and dealt with it. This was of course a Friday. The next fight happened literally the Monday we went back to school, being May 22nd. So this happened in the hallway. We were walking from PE to our 4th block. I was walking and talking with a friend. She talked about how much she hated this one girl, but that's when she noticed that in front of us was the girl that she had problems with. Therefore, she decided to go ahead and duke it out with her. Now, girl fights are in my opinion even worse than boy fights. The main reason is because girls often pull hair. It is also just harder to break them up in general. However, this is a very short fight. The fight started right in front of the vice principal's office, so he immediately ran out of his seat and broke up the fight. Now, in the process of breaking up the fight, he had both the girls stand by a wall. I was of course in math during this time. In math, I sat closest to the door. Because of this, I could actually see my friend standing on the wall. We both just made faces at each other. We also laughed a little bit too. But then the very next day was also extremely eventful. But it wasn't eventful because of a fight. It was eventful because of, let's just say, an issue with the school's bathroom. So the day started pretty normally. We were in English doing a review. However, that's when an announcement was made through the loudspeaker. Do not go into the 8th grade building. If you have a class in the 8th grade building, please report to the cafeteria. Thank you. By the way, my school was split into between the main building, which includes 7th grade, and a separate 8th grade building. So all 8th graders pretty much spent the entire day in the cafeteria. Meanwhile, 7th graders went to class like normal, although we ate lunch in our 2nd block classroom. So for me, that was social studies. Now let's talk about when for a little bit. So I of course had to go to the cafeteria. I sat at the table with 7 8th graders. They were all really nice. I didn't know what was happening, so they told me. So the 8th grade building had a sewage leak. As a result, a bunch of piss and shit just flooded the whole building. One of the 8th graders I was with told me that he jumped out the window. Because of this, students were not allowed to go back and retrieve their phones or anything on their possession. The only thing they could retrieve was house keys. Understandably, this made both students and parents really upset. Afterwards, I went to social studies. During social studies, it was also announced that we would be dismissed at 12 o'clock. We also of course ate in social studies. Then came science. Nobody paid attention, which kinda ticked the teacher off, but come on. The school just had a sewage leak. Do you really think anyone's gonna pay attention? Afterwards, we finally left school. Wow, all of that crazy stuff happened in just one and a half weeks. Things seemed to have calmed down for another week. However, a week after that, things would go back to being crazy. But instead of being crazy in regards to drama, it was more crazy in regards to end-of-year tests. In 7th grade, I took 2 different types of tests. I took the final exams, which were short 40-question tests like what I took for technology, but there were also end-of-grade tests, or EOGs. There were an EOG for math and reading. The math had 75 questions while the reading had 60. EOGs were graded on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being superior and 1 being shitty. For science and social studies, we took final exams. Anyways, we took the math EOG on Wednesday, May 31st. This test was really easy. Because of that, I aced it and made a 5. However, that 5 isn't the only thing special that came out of this test. I'll discuss the other when we get to the last day of school. Also that day, I would begin to implement 3 series on YouTube. This is the second one I did. It too was successful and I received a lot of positive attention. Then that brings us into June. So like May, June was also a really crazy month, but not necessarily school alone made it crazy. A lot of other stuff happened this month too, which I'll get to in a bit. So to start, let's discuss June 1st. This is the date that I took the reading EOG. This is an extremely disappointing test. I made a 4 on it. Had I gotten just one more question right, I would have made a 5 on it. A 5 in my worst subject would have been really cool. Too bad that never happened. The next day, June 2nd, we took the science final exam. Final exams are scored via percentage. They are also considerably more difficult than EOGs, as the questions seem to be written rather in a really weird way. I ended up making an 87 on this test, which wasn't bad at all. In EOG terms, that would be a 5, so that's great. We then had the weekend, and then that brings us to Monday, June 5th. On June 5th, we took the social studies final exam. Like the science exam, this test had some weird-ass questions, but I still prevailed and made a 91 on it. And with that, all of the end-of-year tests are over with. Friday, June 9th was my last day of school, so for the rest of the week, we just did fun stuff. What I mean by fun stuff is really watching movies. The only movie I remember watching was this movie about a kid who meets friends who like baseball and they play baseball together and then they lose a ball signed by Babe Ruth. It was really cool. I was with a bunch of my friends in my math teacher's room, and we all sat on the floor and watched it together. However, the only event I can recall while watching a movie happened in first block on Wednesday morning, June 7th. Our teacher went out of the room to do something, so while we were watching a movie, this girl was chasing this dude for some reason. She wasn't in love with him, they were just playing around like normal middle schoolers. All of a sudden, this kid thought it was a good idea to dive falling backwards in a classroom, so he jumped and then fell to a table. The table then flips over and makes a loud bang noise. The 2 legs diagonal of each other broke as well. Immediately, everyone begins laughing their ass off, especially me. I was probably laughing even harder than everyone else. And believe me, if you were there, you would have died laughing at this too. Somehow, when our teacher came back, she didn't notice anything wrong with the table. No idea how, but if she did notice, it would have probably been even funnier because she would have scolded that kid. And then we have reached Thursday, June 8th, the second and last day of school. Also on this day, the final fight of the school year broke out. So this happened right after science. My locker was right by the boys' bathroom, but that's when I noticed so many boys running into the bathroom as well as some action going on in the bathroom. I was curious, so I joined those boys and ran into the bathroom. What I observed was a full-fledged fight, but it was really obvious who was winning. The boy who won the fight was just torturing this kid. All the boys were cheering on the boys as they fought. I was in the back, so my view wasn't exactly the best. I did see them of course ram into each other as well as a couple punches. That's about it. Eventually, our math teacher came in to see what was happening. He ordered all of us observers to get out of class, so we all did that. He then dealt with 2 boys who were fighting. Now, what's really interesting about this fight is that both of the boys got suspended for 3 days. This raised a lot of questions among students in the entire school. One of the main questions was how will they serve 3 days at school of suspension if the day they got suspended on was the second to last day of school. According to the principal, that suspension carries over to the next year, so these boys missed not only the last day of 7th grade, but also the first 2 days of 8th grade. Yikes. And that brings me to the last day of 7th grade, June 9th, 2017. To celebrate the last day of school, our school held an award ceremony each grade. 8th grade went first, and then 7th grade went afterwards. So at first, the ceremony started off pretty normally. I got to stand up for making all A's all year long, but they also called all the athletes who won championships to stand up too. I didn't stand up for any athletic stuff though, I didn't play any sports. But then things got really crazy. Our teachers gave awards to those who made the highest grades in their classes, as well as awards to those who made the highest grades in end-of-year tests. I ended up getting the award for making the highest grades in social studies, science, and math. I didn't get one for English, as I only had the second highest grade in the class. Then for end-of-year test, I won the award for making the highest grade on the Math EOG, and not just my class, but the entire grade. This definitely made me feel really good about myself. Now, this situation is ironically something me and my parents argue about. My parents got a little upset that they didn't see me get all those rewards. However, I did not know that I would be receiving these awards, so it's kind of a dispute between us. Although school was over, I still was very much busy. What I mean by busy is that the next 2 days, June 10th and June 11th, I had my third swim meet. It was a home meet. This was the first long course meet too. This meet in Rutherfordton and the meet in Charlotte were short course meets. This meet, they were done in 25-yard pools. This meant that they were done in 25-yard pools. Long course meets, which would be this meet, was done in a 50-meter pool, so a little over twice the length. Therefore, every single event I swam at this meet was a new time, meaning I was in a heat one every single event I swam. Now, this meet in particular was similar to the one in Charlotte because it was really big, except that it was even bigger. Most events had 13 of heats. Yeah, that's a lot. Another thing is that the Charlotte swim team came over and participated in the meet. This team took up like 3/4 of the entire meet. I don't remember anything I swam, mostly because it's been 4.5 years, but I do remember it being successful. So let's talk about how swimming worked throughout the summer. So I attended 2 practices a day, Monday through Thursday. It was mainly because mom thought I was destined to be the next Michael Phelps or something, so I did morning practices as well. I honestly didn't mind these though, as I enjoyed swimming. I also want to mention that on Wednesday, June 14th, I started a new series on YouTube. This was more like a sub-series to my Deathman 3 series. It was a Coliseum series. Coliseum is a feature within the game where you can battle other players. This is a series that really brought me to fame in the community, as I followed other people's teams and they wanted to see their team get wrecked. I also became really good at the game as well. The average view count for Coliseum videos was well over 300 views. Because of that, my channel would gain over 100 subscribers in June 2018. Now for the next week, being the week of the 19th, I took this web building class. I was the oldest person in the class, if I remember correctly. Overall, it was pretty forgettable. I had fun, but I did often get bored since all the material we learned was extremely rudimentary, so I just sat in the back and played video games a lot of time. Now, that takes us to June 21st. This would be my 13th birthday. In comparison to other birthdays like my 10th or 14th birthday, my 13th birthday was pretty uneventful. Of course I had that web building class that morning, then the afternoon was pretty forgettable. I mostly laid around and did nothing. But then came swim practice. Now throughout the week, I did not attend morning practices due to the web building class, although I still attended night practices. Anyways, everyone knew that it was my birthday. I had been swimming with them for a year at this point, so they knew. My coach also knew that it was my 13th birthday, which is a very special day in swimming. I'll explain in a little bit. But first let's talk about how the team celebrated my birthday. So I was ordered to swim a 200 freestyle. While I swam, everyone at practice got to splash me as well as hit me with kickboards and other stuff. Really funny way to celebrate my birthday, but it was way better than being sung happy birthday. After practice, my coach wished me a happy birthday personally. He also told me why this was such an important day in regards to swimming. The reason is because the youth swimming league that our team was in divides kids into 2 groups. One group is ages 5 to 12. The other group is ages 13 to 18. Therefore, I was now moving up to the new group. This meant that now I would be swimming against kids who could probably go to the Olympics. And then there was me, whose best 50 freestyle was at the time was only 40 seconds. So that was a big deal. My first meet as a 13-year-old will not be until July, which I'll get to later on. Then that night, I got to eat a cake. This cake was really small, but size didn't really matter much because this cake had so much sugar. Because of that, I didn't eat large slices like I normally do. It also took me a few days to finish this cake off, so this is a good cake. Now, as for presents, I don't remember any of the presents I received on my birthday. However, I do remember a present I received 3 days after my birthday, so in previous story times, I stated that this was Saturday, June 23rd. This is wrong, it was actually June 24th, since the 23rd is a Friday, so if you watch any story times that mention this date, do note that it was the 24th, not the 23rd. Anyways, the day started out normally. I was just in my room doing nothing. But then there was a knock on the front door, so I went and checked it out. The person at the front door was a delivery woman. She was holding a package. She then gave me the package and I thanked her. I knew what this package was, so I didn't hesitate to open up. It was a video camera, so for the rest of the day, I pretty much just messed around with it, trying to learn how to use it. In addition, I also recorded the Minecraft video. The Minecraft video would not be uploaded until later at night. Now, because of the video camera, I now could upload videos of me playing a console connected to my TV. Because of this, I generally uploaded about 3 videos every single day throughout the summer. Yeah, I nowadays really only release content only once a week, with the occasional Geometry Dash Demon completions in between. So this is a lot, but I still had a lot of fun recording YouTube videos. After that, the rest of June 2017 was tame. That brings us into July 2017. July 2017 was one of those months that didn't necessarily have many big events happen, but rather a ton of small events that incorporated it into a big month. Of course, swimming was the biggest thing that went on this month by far, so let's discuss the second to last swim meet that I want to talk about for this story time. This was another home meet. It was on both July 8th and July 9th. It went very similarly to the previous meets, just that now I was 13 and I would be swimming with not only the better swimmers, but also swimming harder events. There are 2 events in particular that I remember swimming in. One of those was a 50 free, so my record at the time was 40 seconds. At this meet, I broke my record by doing it in 39 seconds, even though I was actually dead last in that event. At the previous meet, I believe I was close to last, but not dead last. So you bet that I pretty much got my ass kicked in everything I swam, but I was improving, so it doesn't matter that I got last. Swimming is an interesting sport in this manner because the goal isn't to beat other people, it's to beat yourself. Beating yourself is how you win. So even though I had the slowest time out of everyone, I still won the event because I beat my time. Anyways, the first event that I remember swimming in was the 200, the other event, not the first, was the 200 IM. So this is the first time I got DQ'd in a meet. The reason is because I did a flip turn when transitioning from backstroke to breaststroke. You aren't supposed to do that in IMs. So I thought I could do this since it was my first meet, but the rules are much stricter for the older kids, so that's why I got DQ'd here and not the first meet. Honestly didn't care too much because I did not have any record for it, so I never won or lost the event. Anyways, after this meet, we did not swim for the next week. We went to the beach and like most beach trips, this is really forgettable, so there isn't much to talk about here. But when we got back, it was time to once again go for another meet. This is also the final meet I have to discuss for this story time, as it was the final meet that took place during the pre-depression period. Now, this meet was much more different than the previous 2 meets. It was an away meet in a city called Lenore. This is the same city I went rock climbing in at the beginning of freshman year, by the way. See Storytime 30 if you are lost. It was also a single day meet, taking place on Saturday, July 22nd. Now, prior to doing this meet, I was placed on our team's boys relay team. I was on this team with a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 15-year-old. The specific events that I swam at this meet were a 200 medley relay with the relay team, IM, a 200 individual IM, a 100 breaststroke, and a 100 butterfly. The first one I swam was the 200 medley relay. Each of us swam a different stroke. I was the breaststroker. We ultimately won 2nd place, which isn't saying too much since we were swimming against 4 other teams. I'm also not sure how they let a 12-year-old swim with us, but okay. He was even better than I was, so it actually benefited our team. Then was the 200 individual IM. I learned from what happened at the previous meet, so I applied it here and did not do a flip turn on all this event. It was successful, and I did a new time. I don't remember the time, but I didn't get DQ'd. The next one was the 100 breaststroke. This is really forgettable, so let's talk about the 100 butterfly. Now, butterfly is my best stroke in terms of short distance. I found that out when I joined the summer swim team this summer, but anything over 50 meters, I cannot do. It's not really because of endurance like for most people. For me, it actually has to do with dolphin kicking. I'm naturally breaststroke footed, so pointing my toes and doing dolphin kicks is really hard to do for over 50 meters. That's what happened here. At one point, I did a mini breaststroke kick and I ended up getting DQ'd. I was actually go on to get DQ'd a total of 5 times from the 100 butterfly in future meets. It would not be until March 2018 when I did it correctly, but that would actually be during the post-depression period part 1 when it happened, so not this story time. If you're interested in my first swimming career, then I highly recommend watching Storytime 19. I go into pretty good detail on each of my meets and how my team was structured, as well as how I joined and why I quit. Anyways, after that, our coach then took the entire team, including the parents, out to eat. I sat with the rest of the relay team. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about. All I remember is that the 12-year-old and the 15-year-old got in a little argument about basketball. It was a joking manner, nothing serious. The argument did, however, escalate to the point that they both went to the bathroom, probably to throw paper towels at each other. While they were in the bathroom, me and the 14-year-old just joked about them. We also talked a little bit about how they met, how the meet went for us. The boys eventually came back. A little after they came back, the food was here. Each of us had 6 chicken tenders and a full plate of fries. None of us hesitated to eat our food. In just 2 minutes, all of us had eaten all of our food. Yeah, we were hungry. Now, this was the last long course meet I ever did. I would go on to break both of my arms in March 2018, which resulted in me not doing any meets until that November. Then in March 2019, I quit swimming, mostly because we would get a new coach who was an asshole, which I'll actually discuss later in Storytime since it happened during this time period. Anyways, we did practice as normal for the next week. After that, we reached August. August is the month that we took off swimming. We will return to swimming in September. So August 2017 was the final full month of the pre-depression period. It was also the month that I began the 8th grade. Now, generally speaking, outside of the beginning of the school year, August 2017 was a very forgettable month, as very little happened. Let's just go ahead and talk about the beginning of the school year, shall we? So, 8th grade was nothing like 7th grade, because my 7th grade school year was so successful, I was allowed to take high school courses early. This would prove to have an extremely negative impact on my overall mental health, as I'll discuss in a little bit. So let's talk about my first day of school. This first day was August 28th. My first class of the day was WIN. I was assigned an enrichment WIN like in 7th grade. I chose to do Science Olympiad instead, but that wouldn't start until September, so for now, I was in World History for both WIN and First Block. This was a high school course. Because we were taking it in 8th grade, that meant that we didn't have to take the 8th grade Social Studies final, so that helped us out. World History was overall really easy. It would last until January. My next class was English. Just like advanced 8th grade English, nothing too out of the ordinary happened. English, however, worked strangely. In the middle of PE, we would stop and go to in the middle of English, we would stop and go to PE or our lab. I had PE during this time. I had the same PE teachers this year, and they were even bigger assholes than before. After PE came lunch. Lunch was really bad this school year. When I get to September, I'll discuss why. After lunch came the remainder of English. Then came Algebra. This was by far the hardest course I ever took. The reason is because I pretty much skipped from 7th grade math straight to 9th grade math. I skipped over 8th grade math. Most students already took 8th grade math the year prior in advanced math. I didn't, so I was behind on pretty much everything. There was also generally around 3 pages of homework a night, so that made this class really hard. After Algebra came the final class of the day, being my lab. My lab this time was Spanish. Spanish was extremely forgettable. Although I do remember some stuff we did, most of what we did was later into that semester. And so that brings me to September. This is the final month of the pre-depression period. I'll first talk about swimming and then I'll discuss how this time period ended. So we got back to swimming this month. However, our coach had to leave this team due to a death of a family member. He's from Ohio, so we moved back up there. Therefore, we got a new coach. This coach was an asshole. He worshipped the sport. He was also extremely strict about attendance and stuff like that. But initially, I actually really liked him because he worked on technique. Our old coach was more focused on endurance. However, this coach would make me unmotivated to swim about a year later. And so that brings me to the end of the time period. This is when I knew that 8th grade was absolutely not going to be like 7th grade. As stated, the bullies in 7th grade were more like frenemies. I was now being bullied in PE and at lunch, and these bullies meant business. They truly wanted to make me feel bad about myself and make me feel like shit. Another thing to mention is that I couldn't escape them. At lunch, there was a rule that stated that we must sit with our second block. Our class had 4 designated tables. 2 of them were full, and 2 of them were not. One table had the bullies, while the other table didn't, so I tried to sit with the one without the bullies. However, they would not let me sit with them for some reason. As a result, I was forced to sit with the bullies. Every day they made me feel like I didn't belong and I was a waste of space. This was the moment I became depressed. However, being bullied at school wasn't the only reason for me to become depressed. Stress also factored into my thoughts, too, mostly from schoolwork. I felt like I couldn't catch a break. Everything was going through my head all the time. I couldn't have a moment to be calm. One other factor that also influenced depression would be the internet. So I started to use a platform called Google Plus to interact with my subscribers. This was a huge mistake, as I constantly got into drama that made me feel even worse than I already did. So combining all these resulted in me becoming depressed. So that means that pre-depression period is over. So overall, this is a great time period to live in. I grew quite a lot during it, both physically and mentally. 7th grade was a really fun with all the drama, swimming, and really fun during this time too. And just being a kid in general was fun. So that's all I got for today's story time. I will not be releasing any story time until December 17th, 2021. Not only do I have finals as well as wrapping up high school in the next couple of weeks, but I also have to work on writing 4 big story times I want to do before I move to college this January. So this is a good bye for now. The next time you all see me, I will have graduated high school. And because of that, the next story time, which will be released December 17th, 2021, it will be story time of 43. I'll be talking about my honest opinion of early college and expeditionary